A scullery maid, abused for being wolfless, was forced to serve the ruthless Alpha King, only to discover she was not only his fated mate, but the legendary White Wolf, the true queen of all werewolves, whose emergence would either save their world or shatter it. The scent of bleach and despair clung to Alara like a second skin. It was a perfume she had worn for 10 years, ever since her parents had vanished, and she had been branded an Omega, a wolfless pariah in the heart of the Black Moon Pack. Her hands were raw, the skin cracked and bleeding from scrubbing the Great Hall's flagstones with a lye soap that ate away at flesh as surely as it ate at grime. The cold of the stone seeped into her bones, a permanent chill that no fire could ever seem to vanquish. She was a ghost in her own life, a creature of the shadows, meant to be unheard and unseen. Her world was a cramped space defined by the 4 crumbling walls of her shack at the edge of the Packlands, the steaming heat of the kitchens, and the vast, unforgiving stone floors of Alpha Alaric's lodge. Her existence was a litany of chores punctuated by casual cruelty. She moved through her days with her head down, her gaze fixed on the floor, making herself as small and insignificant as possible. Survival was a matter of invisibility. To be noticed was to invite pain. Briar, the Alpha's daughter, made it her personal mission to ensure Ilara was never truly invisible. She was a vision of dark-haired predatory beauty, her wolf a sleek and vicious creature that mirrored its human counterpart. She saw Ilara not as a person, but as a plaything, a convenient target for her manic boredom and casual sadism. "Look at it, scurrying like a rat!" Briar's voice, sharp and mocking, cut through the relative peace of the early morning. She stood with her 2 sycophants, Lyra and Faye, their arms crossed as they watched Ilara haul a heavy bucket of water from the well. "Still haven't managed to grow a wolf, filth? I'm surprised my father hasn't just put you out of your misery." Ilara flinched but didn't look up. She tightened her grip on the bucket's handle, the rough wood digging into her palm. "Good morning, Briar," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. A manicured hand shot out and shoved her hard. Ilara stumbled, the bucket tipping and sloshing icy water over her worn leather boots. The cold was a shock, but the laughter that followed was a far deeper wound. It was a familiar sound, the soundtrack to her humiliation. "Oops," Briar said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Clumsy thing. Now you smell of wet dog on top of everything else. Go fill it again, and be quicker about it. The floors won't scrub themselves." Ilara gritted her teeth, biting back the hot, useless tears that threatened to fall. Crying only made them laugh harder. She righted the bucket and turned back to the well, the weight of their contempt a physical force pressing down on her shoulders. Inside her, something deep and ancient coiled in on itself, a vast emptiness where a wolf's spirit should have been. That was her secret, the one she guarded more closely than her life. She wasn't just wolfless, she was a void, a vacuum. And deep within that void, something slept. Something immense and powerful, chained in a darkness of her own making. For 10 years she had poured all her energy, every ounce of her will, into maintaining those chains. She kept the beast within her starved and silent, a sleeping hurricane inside a glass jar. The effort left her perpetually exhausted, her body frail, her presence muted. They mistook her suppression for weakness. They mistook the cage for emptiness. It was a mistake that had kept her alive. The announcement came that afternoon, delivered by Alpha Alaric himself, his voice booming across the training grounds. He stood on the veranda of the lodge, chest puffed out with self-importance. Ilara was nearby, polishing the heavy oak doors, trying to remain unseen. "Warriors of the Black Moon!" Alaric bellowed. "We are to be graced with a visitor of unparalleled importance. The Alpha King, Kalen, will be arriving in 3 days' time for the annual tithe ceremony. He will be inspecting our pack, our warriors, and our tribute. I expect every single one of you to be on your best behavior. Our strength and loyalty must be beyond question. Any failure will reflect on me, and I assure you, my displeasure will be memorable." A ripple of awe and terror went through the assembled pack members. The Alpha King, Kalen the Unforgiving, Kalen the Beast Slayer. His name was a legend, a whispered threat used to frighten pups. He was the Alpha of Alphas, ruler of all territories on the continent, his power said to be apocalyptic. He had united the warring packs through sheer brutal force and ruled with an iron fist for 50 years, his youth unnaturally preserved by the sheer might of his wolf. For the others, it was a moment of fearful excitement. For Alara, it was a death sentence. Her blood ran cold, the chill from the stone floor intensifying until it felt like it was freezing her from the inside out. An alpha of that magnitude would see right through her. His power would press against her shields, and he would feel the vast chained thing she kept hidden in the abyss of her soul. He would see her not as a weak, wolfless omega, but as an anomaly, a threat, an abomination, and he would destroy her for it. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the numb exhaustion that was her constant companion. 3 days. She had 3 days to find a way to disappear. But there was nowhere to run. The lands beyond their territory were wild and home to rogues who would tear a lone omega apart for sport. To be caught fleeing was an act of treason, punishable by a slow public death. She was trapped. The king was coming, a tidal wave of lethal power, and she was standing on the shore, waiting to be erased. The next 3 days were a blur of frantic activity. The entire pack was thrown into a frenzy of cleaning, training, and preparation. Every surface of the lodge was scrubbed and polished, every warrior drilled until they dropped from exhaustion. Alara worked until her muscles screamed and her hands bled freely, driven by a desperate hope that if everything was perfect, the king's gaze might just pass over the lowest of his subjects. She felt his arrival before she saw it. It was a pressure change in the air, a sudden drop in temperature, a crackle of raw, untamed energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. It was power on a scale she couldn't have imagined, a force of nature that dwarfed Alpha Alaric's authority, making him seem like a petulant child in comparison. The very ground seemed to hum with his approach. The pack was assembled in the main courtyard, ranked by status. Warriors at the front, then pack members, with the omegas and servants relegated to the far back, near the kitchens. Alara stood among them, her head bowed so low her chin nearly touched her chest, praying for invisibility. A procession of 10 massive warriors, all clad in black leather and bearing the king's silver wolf sigil, entered the courtyard first. They moved with a lethal grace that made the Black Moon's best fighters look like clumsy amateurs. And then, he appeared. The Alpha King Kalen was not a man. He was a monument carved from granite and fury. He was immense, well over 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair was as black as a starless night, and his face was a mask of harsh, unforgiving beauty. But it was his eyes that held the true terror. They were the color of molten gold, glowing with an inner light that spoke of an ancient feral power barely contained within his human form. A long, jagged scar ran from his temple down his jaw, a stark white line against his tanned skin that only made him look more menacing. His presence silenced everything: the wind, the birds, the very heartbeats of the 200 wolves gathered before him. He swept his golden gaze over the assembly, and Alara felt it like a physical touch, a wave of pressure that threatened to bring her to her knees. She squeezed her eyes shut, reinforcing the mental walls around the sleeping beast inside her, praying he wouldn't notice the strain. "Alpha Alaric?" The king's voice was a low growl, a rumble that vibrated in Alara's bones. "Your pack seems adequate." The word was an insult, and Alaric visibly bristled before forcing a sycophantic smile. Alpha King Kalen, you honor us with your presence. My pack is your pack. We are yours to command. Alaric bowed so low his forehead nearly scraped the dirt. Kalen didn't even seem to register the gesture. His gaze continued its slow, predatory sweep of the crowd. His expression was cold, bored, as if he were searching for something he knew he would not find. For decades, he had been searching. At every pack, in every territory, his wolf was restless, hunting for the scent of its other half, the fated mate promised by the moon goddess. And for decades, it had found nothing but disappointment, a hollowness that had carved itself into the king's soul, leaving him cold and empty. The ceremony was to begin in the great hall. Ilara and the other servants were rushed inside, tasked with serving the welcome feast. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. She would have to be in the same room as him. She would have to walk near him. She was given a heavy tray of roasted meats and ordered to serve the high table. Her hands trembled so badly she was afraid she would drop the entire thing. She kept her eyes on the floor, her focus narrowed to the task of putting one foot in front of the other. She approached the table, the scent of pine and ozone from the king growing stronger, more overwhelming. It was a clean, powerful scent that inexplicably made the chained thing inside her stir in its sleep. She reached his side, her movements stiff with fear. She leaned forward to place a cut of meat on his silver platter. As she did, another servant, clumsy in his own nervousness, bumped into her from behind. Ilara stumbled, her balance lost. The tray tilted precariously. She gasped, lurching forward to save it, and her hand brushed against the king's arm. Time stopped. A jolt, like a bolt of pure lightning, shot up her arm and straight into her core. It slammed into the chains around the sleeping beast, and for the first time in a decade, a link shattered. A wave of raw power, silver and white and smelling of moonlight, pulsed out from her, a silent scream only one person in the room could perceive. For Kalen, the world exploded into a singular, intoxicating scent. For 50 years, he had lived in a world of muted colors, of bland, meaningless smells. Now, a fragrance of impossible beauty flooded his senses. Winter jasmine and fresh snow, with an undercurrent of something ancient and celestial, like fallen starlight. It was the scent of his mate, the scent his soul had been screaming for. His wolf, a monstrous black beast of legendary power, rose within him, roaring a single possessive word. Mine. His head snapped up, his molten gold eyes locking onto the terrified, trembling girl beside him. She was thin, dressed in rags, her face smudged with soot. But her eyes, they were the color of a stormy sky, filled with a terror so profound it made his protective instincts surge with the force of a tidal wave. And beneath the fear, beneath the grime, he saw her. The other half of his soul. Ilara saw the look in his eyes change. The bored indifference vanished, replaced by a feral, focused intensity that was 1,000 times more terrifying. It was the look of a predator that had just found its prey. She yanked her hand back as if burned, her heart ceasing to beat in her chest. He knew. She didn't wait for a command. She dropped the tray, the clatter of falling meat and metal lost in the sudden roaring in her ears. She turned and fled. She ran from the great hall, ignoring the shocked shouts of the other servants and the bellow of Alpha Alaric. She ran on pure, unthinking instinct, her only goal to put as much distance as possible between herself and the Alpha King. Kalen watched her go, a low, dangerous growl rumbling in his chest. He didn't move from his seat, but his power flooded the room, an invisible, crushing force that brought everyone, including Alpha Alaric, to their knees. Only his royal beta, Gareth, remained standing beside him, his hand on the hilt of his sword, his expression grim. Gareth. Kalen's voice was lethally soft. Find out who she is. Find out why my mate is dressed in rags and looks like she's been living in hell. Bring me the one responsible, and then bring her to me. The hunt had begun. Alara ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, collapsing behind the kitchens in a heap of trembling limbs. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, trying to make herself small, to disappear into the shadows. It was over. Her life was over. He knew she was different. He had felt her power, the brief, accidental pulse of it. He would think she was a spy, a monster hiding in plain sight. She didn't understand the other part of the encounter, the electric jolt, the magnetic pull she had felt toward him, the strange sense of rightness in his scent. It was confusing, terrifying. All she knew was that the most powerful man in the world had seen her secret, and he was not a man known for mercy. It didn't take long. 2 of the king's elite warriors found her. They didn't speak, their faces grim masks. They simply flanked her, their presence an unbreakable cage. There was no struggle, no escape. They escorted her back toward the lodge, her feet dragging in the dirt. But they didn't take her to the king. They took her to the courtyard, where the entire pack was being reassembled under the furious eyes of Alpha Alaric and the confused, curious gaze of Briar. The king was not yet present. Briar saw her first. She saw Alara being escorted by the king's personal guard, and her mind twisted the scene into a narrative that suited her vanity. The filthy Omega must have done something to offend the king. She was about to be punished, publicly. A slow, cruel smile spread across Briar's face. This was an opportunity too perfect to miss. She could finally rid herself of the little rat and earn favor with the king at the same time by demonstrating the pack's intolerance for weakness. There she is! Briar's voice rang out, sharp with manufactured outrage. The worthless Omega who disgraced our pack in front of the Alpha King. She dared to flee from his presence. She must be made an example of. Alpha Alaric, eager to deflect any potential blame from himself, seized on his daughter's cue. She is a stain on this pack's honor. For years we have tolerated her wolfless presence out of misplaced pity. No more. Tonight, we cleanse our ranks. Briar strode forward, her cronies following her like jackals. She grabbed Alara by the arm, her nails digging in like claws. We're going to find out what you really are, vermin. We're going to force a shift and show the king the pathetic, mangy cur you're hiding. They dragged her to the center of the courtyard, into the ceremonial circle etched into the dirt. The pack members formed a ring around them, their faces a mixture of bloodlust, pity, and fear. This was a pack ritual, a brutal culling. If a wolf was too weak, it was driven out or killed. They were going to tear her apart. Shift! Briar snarled, shoving Alara to the ground. Alara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I can't, she whispered, the words choked with terror. Please. You can't. Or you won't. Briar sneered. She kicked Alara in the ribs, a sharp, brutal impact that stole her breath. We'll make you. She turned to 2 of the pack's most thuggish enforcers. Hold her down. We'll beat the wolf out of her. The 2 brutes grabbed Alara's arms, pinning her to the cold earth. Fear, absolute and primal, swamped her. They were going to kill her. And in her desperation, in her agony as the first blow landed, her control began to fray. The chains she had maintained for a decade groaned under the strain. From the veranda, King Kalen emerged, Gareth at his side. He had been listening, watching from the shadows, his fury building into a silent, apocalyptic storm. He had wanted to see who was responsible for his mate's condition. Now he knew. His eyes, glowing with a terrifying intensity, were fixed on the scene in the circle. Briar, high on her power trip, didn't notice the king's arrival. She landed another kick, then another. Shift, you useless piece of filth! Show us! Pain exploded behind Alara's eyes. The physical agony was nothing compared to the psychic strain of holding the beast back. But she couldn't hold it any longer. The abuse, the terror, the proximity of her mate, and the shattering of that first link had weakened the cage beyond repair. With a sound like 1,000 panes of glass shattering at once, her control broke. It did not begin with a shift. It began with light. A column of pure, blinding silver-white light erupted from Alara, shooting into the darkening sky. It was not the light of the sun or the moon, but something more ancient, more powerful. A wave of raw, untamed power washed over the courtyard, a pressure so immense that every single wolf, Alpha Alaric, Briar, the enforcers, the entire pack, was slammed to their knees as if struck by a giant's fist. They gasped for air, their own wolves whining and whimpering in submission before a power they could not comprehend. The light coalesced, pouring back into Alara's form. The sound of cracking bones filled the air, but it was not the sound of a normal shift. It was deeper, more profound. Her small, frail body was remade, expanding, growing, reshaping into something legendary. When the light faded, a creature from myth stood in the center of the circle. It was a wolf, but a wolf of impossible size and beauty. It was larger than any 3 wolves combined, its form sleek and powerful. Its fur was the color of fresh fallen snow under a full moon, so white it seemed to glow with its own internal luminescence. But it was the eyes that stopped every heart. They were not the eyes of a beast. They were a brilliant, piercing silver, filled with an ancient intelligence and a power that predated the packs themselves. The legendary white wolf, the Luna destined, the queen of all wolves. A collective gasp, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and terror, echoed through the kneeling crowd. The prophecy, a children's story told around campfires, was real. And the wolfless Omega they had been torturing was its vessel. Briar stared, her face ashen, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. The enforcers who had been holding Alara down were scrambling backward on their hands and knees, their faces masks of primal fear. Alpha Alaric looked as though he had been turned to stone, his eyes wide with the horrifying realization of his monumental error. The great white wolf turned its head, its silver gaze sweeping over the terrified pack. There was no anger in its eyes, only a profound, ancient sorrow and a power that could unmake the world. Then its gaze landed on the veranda, on the one man left standing. King Kalen had not knelt. The wave of power had washed over him, and his own wolf had met it not with submission, but with a roar of triumphant recognition. Mate, queen. He stared at the magnificent creature before him, his heart, which he had thought long dead, hammering in his chest. Awe, reverence, and a possessive fury of cataclysmic proportions warred within him. This was his mate. This divine celestial being was his other half. And these insects, these worthless worms, had dared to harm her. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the lodge, Kalen shifted. His transformation was violent, explosive. Black lightning seemed to crackle around him as his body erupted into the form of his wolf, a monstrous beast of pure black fur, its size rivaling the white wolf's, its golden eyes burning like twin suns. He was the darkness to her light, the storm to her calm. He leaped from the veranda, landing silently before the white wolf. The pack held its breath, expecting a battle for dominance of apocalyptic scale. Instead, the unthinkable happened. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf alive, lowered his massive black head, and he knelt. He bowed before his queen, an act of submission and reverence so profound it shattered every known law of their society. He acknowledged her as his superior, his goddess. The white wolf took a step forward and nudged his head with her own, a gesture of acceptance, of forgiveness. A silent communication passed between them, a torrent of emotion, of recognition, of shared destiny flooding the nascent mate bond. Then Kalen rose. He turned his burning golden gaze upon the kneeling pack, and specifically upon Briar and Alaric. A growl started deep in his chest, a sound that promised death in its most agonizing form. The king's protective fury had been unleashed. He shifted back to his human form in a swirl of shadow, standing naked and magnificent in the moonlight, his body a canvas of muscle and scars. The white wolf stood faithfully at his side, a living monument to his authority and her own divine right. Gareth, Kalen's voice was unnervingly calm, a quiet that promised a hurricane. Take my queen to my chambers, see to her every comfort. Place a guard on the door that will die before they let anyone but me enter. Gareth bowed low. My king. He approached the white wolf, his gaze filled with awe, and bowed again. My queen, if you would follow me. The great wolf looked at Kalen, then back at Gareth. With a shimmer of moonlight, her form contracted, flowing back into the shape of Alara. She stood where the wolf had been, naked, trembling, but with a new light in her stormy eyes. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a nascent power that radiated from her skin. Gareth averted his eyes and held out a heavy cloak, which she wrapped around herself. He gently guided her away from the courtyard of stunned and terrified wolves. Kalen watched her go, ensuring she was safe before turning his full, undivided, lethal attention back to the ones who had harmed her. His golden eyes were no longer just glowing, they were burning. Alpha Alaric, Briar, he said, his voice a low, deadly purr. You wanted to see a wolf? You have. Now, you will answer to me for every bruise, every cut, every tear you ever caused my mate. Your judgment is at hand. The promised retribution had begun. Gareth led Alara through the opulent halls of the lodge, a world away from the servants' corridors she knew. He didn't speak, granting her a respectful silence as she tried to process the cataclysmic shift in her reality. The white wolf, her true self, was no longer sleeping. It was awake, a calm, powerful presence at the core of her being. The void was gone, filled with a power that felt like coming home. She was not a monster. She was something else, something more. The king's chambers were a suite of rooms larger than her entire shack. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth, casting a warm glow over rich tapestries, carved wooden furniture, and piles of soft furs. A large bath, already steaming, was set off to one side. It was a place of comfort, of safety. She had never known either. My queen, Gareth said, his voice gentle. I will have food and clean clothes sent. The king will be with you shortly. No one will harm you here. He bowed and retreated, closing the heavy doors behind him, leaving her alone in the sudden, overwhelming silence. Alara stood in the center of the room, the borrowed cloak clutched tightly around her. She looked at her hands, no longer red and raw, but smooth and unblemished. Her body felt different, stronger, more alive. The shift had healed her. It had remade her. She walked to a large silver-framed mirror and stared at her reflection. The same stormy eyes stared back, but the fear that had always clouded them was receding, replaced by a dawning sense of wonder and strength. An hour passed. She bathed in the hot, scented water, scrubbing away years of grime and shame. She dressed in the simple but elegant silk shift that had been left for her. When Kalen finally entered, she was sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance. He had also cleaned himself and was dressed in simple black trousers and a loose tunic. The raw, violent power that clung to him was banked, but she could still feel it, a simmering volcano beneath his skin. He stopped a few feet away from her, his golden eyes searching her face. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice a low rumble. She shook her head. The shift healed me. He nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. I have waited my entire life for you, Alara. I have searched every pack, every territory. I was beginning to believe the moon goddess had cursed me. I don't understand, she whispered. What am I? He moved closer, his presence so intense it was hard to breathe. He knelt before her, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, possessive, and sent that same jolt of lightning through her veins. It wasn't frightening anymore. It felt like recognition. You are the fulfillment of a prophecy older than the pacts themselves, he explained, his voice filled with a reverence that stunned her. The story says that when the world of wolves is on the brink of a new darkness, the soul of the first Luna, the companion of the moon goddess herself, will be reborn. She will manifest as the White Wolf, a being of celestial power, destined to unite with the Alpha King and lead our people into a new age. You are not just my mate, Alara. You are our queen, our goddess, reborn. The words were too immense to fully comprehend. A goddess? A queen? She was Alara, the Omega, the scullery maid. But as he spoke, the truth of it resonated with the ancient power now awake within her. It felt right. Why was I like this? She asked, gesturing to her past self. Why couldn't I shift? Your power is too vast for a normal childhood, he said, his gaze softening. It had to lie dormant, protected, until it was triggered by the presence of your mate. Your subconscious mind built a cage around it to keep you safe, to hide you from those who would fear or exploit you. The hardship you endured was a trial by fire, forging the strength of will needed to contain such power. It was cruel, but it was necessary. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming release. She had not been broken, she had been forged. What happened to them? She asked quietly. Alaric and Briar. Kaylin's eyes flashed with gold fire. They await their judgment, and you will be the one to deliver it. The next morning, the pack was assembled once more in the courtyard. This time, however, 2 thrones had been placed on the veranda. Kaylin sat on one, a fearsome king in his black leather. The other was empty. He rose as Alara approached, escorted by Gareth. She was dressed in a simple gown of silver gray that matched her eyes, her hair unbound. She walked with a new confidence, her head held high. Every wolf in the pack bowed their head as she passed, their respect born of awe and terror. She took her seat beside Kaylin, her rightful place. Bring the prisoners forward, Kaylin commanded. Alpha Alaric and Briar were dragged into the circle, stripped of their finery, their faces bruised and swollen. They were forced to their knees before the thrones. Briar was sobbing uncontrollably, but Alaric stared up at Alara with a look of pure, venomous hatred. This is a trick, he spat. She is a demon, a witch. She has enchanted the king. Kaylin's growl was his only answer, a sound that made Alaric flinch and fall silent. The king then turned to Alara. My queen, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. You were the one who suffered under their tyranny. The law of the pacts is clear. Justice is yours to dispense. What is your sentence? All eyes turned to her. Alara looked down at the 2 people who had made her life a living hell. She saw Briar, broken and pathetic, all her cruelty stripped away to reveal a cowering child. She saw Alaric, defiant and hateful to the end. She felt the white wolf inside her, a being of immense power, but also of immense balance. Vengeance was a human emotion. What was needed was justice. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, imbued with an authority that no one dared question. Briar, she began, her gaze locking with the weeping girls. Your cruelty was born of insecurity and arrogance. You will be stripped of your rank and your name. You will live out your days as an Omega, working in the infirmary, tending to the sick and the weak. You will learn the compassion you so sorely lack. And perhaps one day, you will earn forgiveness. Briar stared, shocked. It was a fate worse than death to someone like her, a life of service and humility. Alara then turned to Alaric. You were an alpha. Your sacred duty was to protect every member of your pack, especially the weakest. You failed. You fostered a culture of cruelty and abused your power for your own gratification. For this, there is no forgiveness. She looked at Kalen. He is a traitor to his office and to his people. By law, his life is forfeit. Kalen nodded, his expression grimly satisfied. The sentence is passed. He stood. Alaric of the former Black Moon Pack, you are found guilty of treason against your Luna Queen. You are sentenced to death. Briar, you are sentenced to a life of servitude. The rest of this pack is now under my direct rule. You will learn what true loyalty means. Justice had been served. But as Alaric was dragged away, screaming curses, Alara saw a figure at the edge of the crowd watching with cold, calculating eyes. It was one of the king's own party, a handsome, dark-haired noble she recognized as his cousin, Lord Valerius. He offered her a small, polite smile, but his eyes held no warmth. They held only ambition and a flicker of something that looked dangerously like contempt. A new unease settled in her heart. One evil had been vanquished, but another, far more insidious, was watching from the shadows. In the days that followed, Alara's life transformed completely. She was no longer a servant, but a queen. She moved into Kalen's royal wing permanently, her every need attended to. But more than the luxury, it was the respect that felt so foreign. Pack members who once would have kicked her aside now bowed their heads and averted their eyes, whispering Luna Queen as she passed. Kalen was a constant, powerful presence at her side. He was patient, teaching her about the history of their people, the intricacies of pack politics, and the true nature of the power she now wielded. The mate bond between them grew stronger each day, a humming, vibrant connection that settled the turmoil in her soul. With him, she felt safe. With him, she felt whole. He showed her how to connect with the White Wolf, not as a separate entity to be feared, but as an integral part of herself. They would go out into the deep woods at night, and under the light of the full moon she would shift. Running beside his massive black form, she felt a freedom she had never dreamed possible. Her wolf was not a beast of rage, but of grace and immense, calming power. The flora of the forest seemed to bloom in her wake, and nocturnal animals, instead of fleeing, would watch her pass with a strange reverence. Your power is not for destruction, Kalen told her one night, as they lay in their human forms on a bed of moss, staring up at the stars. It is the power of creation, of balance. You are the heart of our people, Alara. I am their sword and shield, but you are their soul. Despite this newfound peace, the calculating gaze of Lord Valerius haunted her. He was always polite, always deferential to her in public, praising the king's good fortune in finding his mate. But Alara could feel the lie behind his courteous smile. His scent was wrong. Under the smell of nobility and clean linen, there was a bitter undercurrent of envy and deceit. The white wolf inside her did not trust him. Her instincts proved correct 1 week later. Kalen had been called away to a council with the neighboring alphas to formally announce her ascension. He had wanted her to come, but she had felt the need to stay, to acclimate to her new role within the pack that was now hers to co-lead. He left her with Gareth and a contingent of his royal guard, promising to return by nightfall. That evening, Alara was in her chambers, reading through ancient scrolls about the lineage of the White Wolves. A sudden sharp scent of something acrid, like burnt silver, made her look up. The guards outside her door were silent, too silent. A faint scratching sound came from the lock. Alara stood, her heart beginning to pound. The white wolf stirred within her, alert and wary. The door swung open, not with a crash, but with a soft, sinister click. Lord Valerius stood in the doorway. He was not alone. Behind him stood two hulking warriors she didn't recognize, their eyes cold and empty. Valerius held a small, ornate crossbow, the bolt tipped with a wicked-looking head that gleamed with a milky, silvery sheen. Wolfsbane laced silver. A poison lethal to any werewolf. "My apologies for the intrusion, Your Majesty," Valerius said, his voice a silken mockery of respect. "But your reign, I'm afraid, is going to be regrettably short." "Valerius," Alara said, her own voice steady, betraying none of the fear that tried to claw its way up her throat. "The king will kill you for this." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The king is a sentimental fool. This prophecy has made him weak, kneeling to a thing like you. For 50 years, I have been his loyal cousin, his heir apparent. I will not be cast aside for some mythical freak found in the dirt. When he returns, I will tell him a tragic story of rogue assassins. He will be heartbroken, and I will be there to comfort him, to guide him, to take the throne when his grief eventually consumes him." The two warriors moved to flank him, drawing long, silver-coated daggers. They began to advance on her. "My men have dealt with your royal guard," Valerius said, raising the crossbow. "There is no one coming to save you, little queen." He was wrong. She didn't need anyone to save her. As the warriors lunged, Alara didn't try to shift. There wasn't time, and the enclosed space would be a disadvantage. Instead, she reached for the power Kaelin had taught her to feel, the calm, celestial energy of the white wolf. She closed her eyes and drew it up from the depths of her soul. Instead of erupting as blinding light, it manifested as a wave of absolute, soul-crushing tranquility. It was the peace of the deepest forest, the silence of a snow-covered mountain peak. It washed over the two advancing warriors, and their feral, bloodlusting rage was instantly extinguished, replaced by a profound, disorienting calm. Their eyes went wide with confusion, their charge faltering. They stopped, looking down at their silver daggers as if they had no idea how they had gotten there. Valerius, further away, was less affected, but he grunted as the wave of peace hit him, his aim wavering for a critical second. It was the only opening Alara needed. She moved with a speed and grace she hadn't known she possessed. She didn't run from him, she ran toward him. She slammed the heavy scroll she was holding into the crossbow, knocking it aside just as he fired. The silver-tipped bolt hissed past her ear, embedding itself deep in the wooden wall behind her. Before he could react, she was on him. She was not a trained fighter, but she had the instincts of the ultimate predator. She drove her palm into his nose with a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. He staggered back, howling in pain and shock, dropping the now useless crossbow. The two warriors were shaking their heads, the calming effect wearing off, their killer instincts returning. But it was too late. The sound of the struggle and the pulse of Alara's power had been a beacon. The chamber doors exploded inward, torn from their hinges. Kaelin stood there, his return earlier than expected. His eyes were not gold, they were blazing infernos. He took in the scene in an instant. Alara, fierce and defiant, his cousin, bleeding and armed, the silver bolt in the wall. The rage that came off him was a physical thing, an apocalyptic pressure that cracked the very stones of the floor. "You touched my queen," he snarled, each word a death sentence. Valerius's face went white with terror. "Kaelin, it's not what it looks like. She's a monster. She attacked me." Kaelin didn't answer with words. He answered with a shift so fast, so violent, it was little more than a black blur. One moment, he was a king. The next, a demon wolf of shadow and death was on Valerius, bearing him to the ground with the force of a freight train. The sound of the traitor's screams was mercifully brief. The other two warriors, seeing their master fall, turned to flee. They didn't get 2 steps before Gareth and the royal guard were on them, a whirlwind of steel and righteous fury. Ilara stood. breathing heavily, as Kalen shifted back, his chest heaving, his body splattered with the blood of his treacherous cousin. He came to her, his eyes scanning her for any injury, his hands framing her face. "He didn't hurt you?" he growled, his voice thick with the aftermath of his fury. "No," she said, her voice shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. "I'm all right." He looked from her to the dazed warriors, to the broken Valerius, and back to her. A look of fierce, profound pride dawned in his eyes, overwhelming the rage. "You fought," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You defended yourself." "You told me I was a queen," she replied, a small, weary smile touching her lips. "I started to believe you." He crushed her to him then, a desperate, possessive embrace that told her everything words could not. He had almost lost her. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent of moonlight and jasmine, grounding himself in the fact that she was real and she was safe. The final threat was neutralized. The conspiracies and the cruelty were at an end. All that was left was their future. 6 months later, Ilara stood on the grand balcony of the royal citadel, the heart of the werewolf world. The chill of the mountain air was a pleasant kiss on her skin. She was no longer the shivering Omega from the Black Moon Pack. She was a queen, confident and serene, robed in white and silver, the sigil of the white wolf proudly displayed. The world had changed. Under her and Kalen's joint rule, a new era of peace and prosperity had begun. Her calming influence tempered his warrior's ferocity, and his strength gave her the platform to enact her compassionate will. The packs were united not just by fear of their king, but by love for their queen. She was a beacon of hope, the living proof that even the lowest among them could rise to greatness. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. Kalen's scent of pine and ozone enveloped her, a scent that now meant home. "What is my beautiful queen contemplating so seriously?" he rumbled, his voice a soft murmur against her ear. She leaned back against his solid warmth, placing her hands over his. "I was just remembering a girl who used to scrub floors," she said softly. "A girl who was cold and hungry and afraid of her own shadow." His arms tightened around her. "That girl was a diamond, covered in mud. She was always a queen. The world was just too blind to see it." She turned in his arms to face him, her stormy gray eyes meeting his molten gold ones. The love that flowed between them was a palpable force, the fated bond now a deep and unbreakable chain of shared experience and devotion. "And I was remembering a king who was so lost in his own power he forgot what it was to feel," she countered gently, tracing the scar along his jaw. "A king who was all ice and fury." "That king died the moment he touched you," Kalen said, his voice raw with emotion. "You saved me, Ilara. You saved us all." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that was not about passion or possession, but about promise. It was a promise of a shared future, of a new dawn for their people, built on the foundation of their love. From the ashes of her suffering, a new world had been born, proving that even in the deepest darkness, a single spark of divine light could set everything ablaze. For in the end, love was not just a powerful magic, it was the only magic that truly mattered.